Okay, so it was a fairly harmless, revision for that one. And then we have this one. This one, is starting to see more changes. You can see from the header file that I'm actually starting to make use of the time val structure, because the time val structure is what the socket call requires to specify the timeout. But as it turns out, it has its own API, so there are like 4 or 5 functions that you can use to compare, to set, to clear, to check whether there's still any time left in the structure, and so on and so forth. So it's just a handy thing to have, otherwise you have to write your own logic to deal with the members of a time val structure, which is not impossible, it's just extra work that I did not want to do. So over here you can see that I changed the int type for time read time left and write time left to time val structures. Okay, which makes sense because that is well supported, and it is the same type of data structure that you use for the select call. And min time now returns a struct time val instead of an integer. Okay, instead of passing a pointer to store the result, I just make it return the entire structure. The logic has changed a little bit because this time I used alive as a filter. In other words, if a client is not alive, I don't even want to pay attention to how much time is left for a read or write operation, because guess what? It is not alive. And the rest of it is pretty much the same. Just change the structure a little bit of time, a little bit. Subtime is not used anyway, so don't ignore that one. And then I have some other changes here. Timeout is going to be based on the minimum amount of time that is left for each read and write operation. And then we have some major changes here. I changed the structure of the loop so that the loop itself, before it is doing the read operation and it's also doing the echoing at the same time, not in this case. Okay. So the loop does not actually try to echo all the characters to all the other clients anymore. All it does is to say, okay, I know you have at least one character for me to read. I'll just grab that character. Thank you very much. But it does not immediately try to echo that character back out to all the other clients. That is now handled in a different way. And let's see, what else did I change here? I preserve most of the nagging part. And the timeout, is changed. If I successfully read a character, then I also have to remember to reset the timer for that particular client or for that particular socket and say, oh, I just read one character here, so now we have 60 more seconds before I time out that particular socket for not having anything to read. Okay, so after I read successfully from one socket, I just reset the timer and say, okay, from now on, you have another 60 seconds before I time you out. Okay, that's basically the logic of this code here. And then we have this stuff. This stuff is all moved away, anyway. And then I changed the logic of how to scan for the maximum file descriptor. Instead of using the other way, the previous way of doing it, I just scan through all the clients that are still alive, and then just ask, okay, what is your socket file descriptor? What is your file descriptor? And then find out which one has the maximum value and use that as the maximum file descriptor. And the initialization of each client now actually includes the read timeout and the write timeout. That's one revision. Okay, so this is the next revision here. So min time gets some additional changes in terms of the way it works. I pre-initialized the minimum to be 1,000 seconds, which is definitely a lot more than the actual minimum, because the maximum is 60 seconds. Okay, so that will make sure that I can actually find out what is the time, what is the maximum amount of time.
Why not just start at 60? Why not just start it at 60?
Just in case I, goofed up somewhere else. And then here, let's see. This one is just comparing, it's basically saying if the socket file descriptor of this client is inside the read FDs, which means I'm still actively reading from this particular client. In other words, I changed the structure of the program to the point where it will grab each, how should I put it? The server will basically say, okay, do you have a character for me? Do you have a character for me? Do you have a character for me? And it will just keep asking that question. Now, if one particular client does have a character for me, then it will say, okay, I'm grabbing that character right now. But then I will basically say, okay, now my job is to echo that character or broadcast that character to everybody. And when I'm doing that, when I'm broadcasting this character from this client to everybody else, I do not even try to read from that socket anymore. Is it making any sense? In other words, the broadcast mechanism has a buffer of 1. Okay, I read one character, I broadcast. I read one character, I broadcast. So that means if I have just read one character from this client, but I have not successfully broadcasted that one character to everybody else, I will not even try to read from that socket again until I have broadcasted a character to everybody. Is that okay? So that changes the logic, because that means, I know it's really hard for you guys to read because of the syntax highlighting. Okay, so that basically changes the logic, because I have to make sure that I'm even trying to read from this socket, inside the read file descriptor set, before I use the remaining time of this client to calculate the minimum amount of time to wait. Because if the server is not even trying to read from this client, then I don't want to use the read time left of this particular socket to specify how much time I should wait in the select call before it times out. Yep.
What's this timer compare? Is that part of the?
It's part of the time-val API. Oh. So if you do a man3, I think it's a man3 timers compare. It has a whole bunch of subroutines like that. It has one for subtraction, one for compare, one for
operator.
The operator is specifying how should this comparison be done. So this is checking for less than. It's checking for this time to be less than this time. It will return 0 or non-zero, true or false in that case. So it's not like string compares, because string compare returns -1 or negative value when the first one is less than the second one, returns 0 when they're the same, and returns positive when the first is greater than the second one. Yep.
How do you write a function that takes an operator?
That's got to be implemented
as a macro. Yep. Yep, it's a macro. It's actually pretty handy, it's useful. You can actually write your own subroutine or macro to do the same thing. Since there's one already, I just decided to use the one that's already available. Yep.
How do you write a macro that takes an operator?
Yeah, you just give it a placeholder, and then refer to the placeholder where you expect the operator to be in the comparison.
Huh. Macros can take anything.
Yeah, macros can take a curly brace, can it?
I know you can replace.
Yeah, because the preprocessor gets control first,